Earlier this week, we lost one of the icons of my generation. Hello again, everyone. I'm Eli's dad with Project Eli, where we educate, lead, and inspire. And today I want to talk a little bit about that icon and how a characterization tends to define certain people, you included. Well, who is it that we lost? The gentleman that we lost was a man named Ken Osmond. Ken Osmond played a character on a show called Leave It to Beaver. And the character that he played was kind of one of my favorites because when my sister and I used to watch this show, we always used to get excited when he was on. Because there was Beaver, there was Wally, there was June and Ward, the parents, and they each had certain characterizations that you could count on, and all of the different characters on this show had characterizations that you could count on as well. They had a gentleman named Fred Rutherford, who was like a pompous old man, and then they had his son Lumpy, his real name was Clarence, and Clarence was somebody that, he was called Lumpy for a reason. All right, his father always thought of him as being very sophisticated, knew that he wasn't, but presented him that way. But in real life, in the show, Lumpy was kind of a goof, to say the least. But anyway, here's the point. Characterization is something that people carry with them. So you want to be careful about the characterization that you present to the public, because people get a particular opinion of you, and when just a name being mentioned, people think about a certain persona. Now, as far as Eddie Haskell is concerned, the character that Ken Osmond played so well for several years, he was always like the very polite, "Good morning, Mr. Cleaver. Good morning, Mrs. Cleaver. Wow, Mrs. Cleaver, you look even very pretty in just an apron. Your hair is so nice today, Mrs. Cleaver." And that was on the one side. And then on the other side, when he was with, Wally and the Beaver, he would always say like, "Yo, Sam, what's happening, and talk like that and be kind of a mean guy. So he was kind of a two-faced person. Not kind of a two-faced person, he was exactly a two-faced person. So back in my day, when there was somebody that was like that, we used to call him an Eddie Haskell. You're an Eddie Haskell. So the persona was so strong that people even characterized others by saying, "Hey, you're an Eddie Haskell." And I want to point out to you that there are other people in history that have had both fictional and non-fictional that have that type of a characterization. Now, if somebody were to call me a Romeo, well, that would be somewhat of a compliment, like, "Oh, he's a real ladies' man, he's a Romeo." All right. On the other hand, I'm not real excited about somebody calling me a Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold was a very capable general during the Revolutionary War, but Benedict Arnold is known as a traitor. So if somebody calls you Benedict Arnold, hey, that's not a good thing. And I'm not exactly, as you can tell from the production the people that produce it are pretty good, but my portion of the production, I'm not exactly a Bill Gates. And people use that expression to define somebody that's very technologically with it. Also, there was a fictional character named Archie Bunker. Now, when you say Archie Bunker, what are you talking about? He was the main character on a show called All in the Family, and when people said you're an Archie Bunker, what they were talking about was somebody that tended to be very, very prejudiced, because that's the character that he played, and he played it in kind of a lovingly way. But when somebody called you an Archie Bunker, that was not necessarily a compliment. Of course, when somebody calls you an "Hey, Einstein," or to be more accurate most of the time, the reference is, "You're not exactly Einstein," which means you're not particularly a genius. How about someone says, hey, don't be a Sherlock Holmes, okay? Or what they tend to say is, no kidding, Sherlock. So it's like, this is an obvious thing. You're a detective. Get with it. Or Clarence Darrow. Who was Clarence Darrow? Clarence Darrow was an attorney of major repute back in, I think, the 20s. And I don't even know a whole lot about Clarence Darrow, but once again, his persona goes forward. When somebody says, you're a Clarence Darrow, that means you're a really smart, good attorney. Or if someone says, hey, I ain't exactly Rockefeller, what does that mean? That means you don't have a lot of coin. It means you don't have a lot of money. Or back in my day, people would say, wow, she's a real Marilyn Monroe, which means a real beautiful, sexy woman. Or Cleopatra, pretty much the same thing. How old would Cleopatra be today? All right, so I mean, these things carry down. And then the last one I want to tell you about is a lady named Mata Hari. Mata Hari was a woman that, used her sexuality to be somewhat of a spy. So when someone says she's a real Mata Hari, that means, she's getting in there to find out information, to be sort of a Benedict Arnold, if you will. So the major point I'm making is, when people think of you, they tend to think of your most outstanding trait. Just the same way as we think of Eddie Haskell being a two-face, or Mata Hari being kind of a two-face. So be careful of the persona, the vibe that you give out there, because that is how people identify you. Some people get identified as being very, very smart. Now, you got to recognize that in real life, people are, have a whole wide range of different personas. But when people think of a particular person, their first thought is to cast a stereotype of that person. I know that I'm as guilty as anybody else in terms of doing that, and that's one of the things I try and fight. I try and see the good in everybody. And I recommend that, especially in today's times where we're being challenged on so many different fronts, health-wise, economically, socially, with things being cut down, that you try and broaden your horizons. And look, when you look at a characterization, remember that that's one aspect. But also remember that you as a person, that most people will look at you and they're going to remember that one thing about you. And because we will never end a meeting on a philosophical note, farewell Eddie Haskell, farewell Ken Osmond. Let's all get out there and charge! I'm Eli's dad.